Hello and welcome to the 2022 Film Music House during Sundance Film Festival. My name is Thomas Mikus and my guest today is Max Avery Lichtenstein, who scored the documentary The Chains, which is in the running in the US documentary competition. Max has scored several Oscar-nominated and Emmy-winning projects in the past. And if you would like to learn more about his work, hear his music, please check out the bio in the section below. So, hello, Max. How are you doing today?
Howdy. I'm good.
To have you here.
Cold. It's freezing cold here in the New York area, but other than that, I'm doing very well, thanks.
Unfortunately, we are not freezing in Park City because I would enjoy that much more. You met the directors Tia and Emma because they licensed some music for previous project. Is that correct? How did that whole collaboration come about?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So they were cutting with some of my music from The King, which is a movie I did with James Marsh. They were using it for their documentary about Jane Fonda, which came out a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. And eventually they got in touch to see about licensing the track, and which worked out great. And then earlier this year, Emma contacted me. She was the producer on the Jane Fonda picture. She contacted me because she was directing this project with Tia, and they were using a bunch of my library material in their early cutting. And so they were curious if I had more that I could share and what my availability was. And of course, when they told me about the project and the subject matter, which is obviously so timely, I was really curious. So we started talking quite early in the process, and I got involved, and it's been really a wonderful experience working with them.
You just mentioned that, unfortunately, I would say the subject matter is still current and timely. Yet the story itself is, is a story from the 60s. How did you tackle that musically?
Well, so that was the most appealing part of the conversation that we first had about doing a score for this. Was they were very much interested in giving the film a 60s feel. They really wanted the score to reflect the period that these women were living in. And I had done another documentary last year called Harley, which had a little bit of this sort of warbly, slightly underground feeling pieces in it. And they were temping with some of that, and they loved it. And so once they told me, we're using this piece, we love it, we'd love to get more like that, it really gave me the perfect blueprint to follow. And then we also talked about some of the other classic caper heist films from the 60s, things like The Italian Job or Mission Impossible, obviously, Get Carter. So I definitely, sort of kept those composers in mind, like Quincy Jones and Lalo Schifrin, in trying to capture the sound of the time, without, I didn't want to parody it, but we definitely wanted it to feel like this music could have been made for a movie in the 60s.
It's interesting. I really, really enjoyed the music so much. And I think it's what I like about the soundtrack is that it can stand on its own, I think. And it's super interesting. And it's such a great listening experience. And I haven't seen the film yet, unfortunately. And as you pointed out, like watching it, I actually thought of Henry Mancini quite a bit also. It kind of,
Definitely.
It had this heist feeling. Can you talk about that very specific choice, though, to come up with this heist feeling, that urgency? And some of the pieces are actually, I thought, listening to them, very uplifting.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you, by the way. It was definitely, I think, a conscious choice to reflect the unbelievable actions of these women, the gutsiness. I mean, we said gutsiness many times in our spotting. These were women who knew they were breaking the law to help other women at a time when there were no options for legal abortion, certainly in Chicago at the time of the story being told. And, these were young women who, it was the late 60s, so there was definitely a rebellious spirit in the air. And they were involved in all sorts of political movements. But in this case, there were real consequences if they were to get caught. They could go to jail. They could go to jail for a long time. And yet they were committed to doing this because it meant something important to them. And it's so amazing to see. And so we wanted to reflect this sort of energy that it must have felt like to have to sneak around the clandestine aspect of their whole story. And that really served well with the caper. There's a great scene in the film where one of the Janes is talking about, having to go from the pharmacy, picking up a whole bunch of supplies, loading hundreds of syringes in the car, and then driving as carefully as possible back to their house, trying not to get pulled over, because how could they possibly answer those questions? So they really were, operating, behind the scenes and undercover, and so by reflecting that in the music, it really does, I think, bring that story alive, that part of the story.
Were you aware of the Janes before, or was that something that you heard from Tia or Emma when they pitched the movie to you?
I obviously I knew that there were, people who were committed to providing reproductive health services prior to Roe versus Wade, but I hadn't actually heard the story of the Janes, and it was fascinating to me. It's what's great about the film and the story is it's also a story of Chicago at the time, so it's kind of got this very specific environment that they're all working in. I have family in Chicago, but not it's not my background. So it was great to get to learn about that. And Emma, I believe, is from Chicago, so I think she had the awareness and brought it to everyone's attention here. So.
And they were very specific also from the beginning, the directors musically, or was there a lot of searching and kind of finding a tone together?
Well, we definitely knew from the beginning that we wanted to go with this 60s flavored heist stuff. But then there was also the question of how to deal with some very difficult subject matter and to do it respectfully and to do it with heart, and not to let it get maudlin or anything like that. So we did some experimenting with, okay, should we score? There are several stories of the women who tell their own personal experiences with abortion. And at the beginning of the process, we thought, well, do we need to score that? Is that something that we want to underscore? And we quickly realized that no, that was not the right thing to do. Those are moments that the women can speak for themselves, and the emotion of the story speaks for itself. And then there are other parts where it's really about the sort of ingenuity of these women and just the process that they had to go through to build the energy to get this thing working. And in those cases, we did end up finding sort of a slightly more acoustic chamber ensemble approach that worked nicely to sort of reflect maybe the mature looking back attitude. Usually those pieces we use those when we're seeing the women speaking of the past. So there's this nice sort of duality of the score between the chamber acoustic stuff and the caper and rock, more source sounding pieces.
Max, you just brought up a very important point, and it is, the giving space also for a documentary, giving space to the audience, but also for the subjects. And can you elaborate a bit more about that? How you how you found those areas where to give space, but also how to run a fine line when scoring documentary and not manipulate through music, and to stay truthful, not only when giving space, but also when picking when scoring the documentary.
Yeah, I think that that's the challenge of documentary scoring. The joy and the fun of scoring a narrative feature is that it's all fake. It's all an edifice. But documentary, I think that it's important to stay true to the story that the characters are telling and that the directors want to tell. And particularly when it's something as personal as abortion. So I've been lucky to score a lot of documentaries, so I have sort of learned when it's important, when bringing music in can sort of propel the story forward. We look for those times, and my general attitude is, if we don't need to have music for almost a technical reason to keep that energy going, then let's not use it, because it's more honest to the storytelling. And then there are times when you try something and you say, all right, let's see, what would it sound like if we do this here? Or you can do creative things when you're trying to get the audience to really feel transported to the story that's being told. And that's where using the sort of more genre-based scoring works.
Mm-hmm. I was just looking while you talked, I was looking into your studio also, and I see there's some guitars, there's keyboards. And can you talk a bit about the instrumentation? You talked about the chamber orchestra for the film. Can you talk a little bit about the instrumentation that you used, and what instruments do you use to create that 60s heist feel? Is there some specifics?
Well, so interestingly, a lot of this was influenced by the pandemic too. But back in the day, I would have expected to hire a couple of musicians and get everybody up to my studio and track here. And then I really like to write a little bit, record a little bit, and then take those recordings and sort of manipulate them and cut them up and use them in all sorts of interesting ways. And I've been doing that for about 20 years. So I actually have a fairly large library of tracks that have been recorded over time that I can pull from. And I also have a large library of third-party sounds and things like that. So in this case, I did have to rely a little bit more on the working in the box to recreate these sounds, but it was great. It worked out well, and I played guitar on bass and a little drums, and but also I found a great use for vintage samples of drum kits and I will say Spitfire has some lovely. The Bernard Herrmann library came in real handy in this particular score. So it does depend on the project, and again, it also depends on the atmosphere of the world. Can I get people to come in and play? And it was great in this case. I was, I think, able to pull things off all by myself.
And it doesn't sound like it. It really sounds. I know. I really love the score.
Thank you.
Especially the final piece that I want to talk about a little bit. It's somehow different. It uses the piano quite a bit, and I feel more touching emotionally. And I haven't seen the picture, as I said earlier. But what is the background for that piece?
Well, I don't want to give away the story too much, but as we all know, these women do eventually get caught providing these abortion services, which is a major offense, and 5 of them are facing over 110 years in prison. And there is a real question as to whether or not they're going to go to jail. And fortunately, they get in contact with a very successful lawyer, a woman who was a civil rights lawyer but took the case on, and she took an approach that was very smart. She just wanted to get them off. And so she just delayed until she knew Roe versus Wade was being decided, and her hope was that will be the answer. And so this last piece of the film, it's just a few minutes actually after Roe is decided that we get the sense of relief that these women are not going to have to suffer the rest of their lives for doing something that was so generous and so thoughtful. And at the same time, we're looking at it from the perspective of today and thinking, are we going to head back to this kind of situation where women have to sacrifice their own lives to help other people and or just simply to make a choice for themselves? So this final piece, I think it was important to represent the emotional stakes of the whole story, but to do it in a very non-manipulative way, in a very subtle and just heartfelt way. And I feel for these women, I'm so just genuinely impressed by what all of them did and what all of their clients had to go through. And so I think that I tried to bring that to the piece. And we did a couple of passes with some different ideas. At one point, something a little bit more joyful. And then we quickly realized that it was really, much bigger than that. So I tried to come up with a piece that felt like a really solid foundation from the heart, and just kept it subtle and with little rises here and there. And it's nice. I mean, it was great when we were at the final day of the mix doing that final cue, and Emma turned to me and said, "Oh, I just got chills." When a director says that to you after watching the film 100 times beforehand, hearing that piece of music, then I feel like I hit something on the mark. So that's good.
Wonderful. I mean, I'm sure that was a beautiful moment and experience. Yeah. What impact do you hope the film will have on audiences, at Sundance, but then also once it goes to HBO?
Yeah, I mean, that's the exciting and terrifying question. My hope is that people will see it and see, it's a very human story that, it's obviously this story takes place in the 60s, but women have had to deal with this question since the beginning of time. And, my personal opinion is that it's important for women to have the choice to pursue their lives the way they want to. And I hope that people see this and realize that when things are not permitted that need to happen anyway, people will find a way to make them happen. And so much of this story is about the women who didn't get help from the Janes, the women who had to turn to the mafia and had to try to self-induce abortions, and the tragedy and the death that resulted from that. And I hope, and the fundamental hope, I think, is that people see this and realize that going back to that is just not good for anybody. We all cherish life, and going back to that would be the opposite.
I very much look forward to seeing the film here at Sundance, and I hope large audiences will be able to see it once it comes to HBO. And I also want to point out there is a narrative feature here with the same subject matter at Sundance, and I really think over the next few months that people will tune in and watch the film and the documentary. I have one more question to you personally. I just want to know, what is your goal now for the future? Where do you see yourself career-wise going, especially working on with this heist music now. Do you want to do a 60s heist movie now and a narrative
I,
feature?
I mean, I definitely, I haven't, it's been a while since I've fully scored a narrative feature, and it's always fun. It's a great thing to do. And yes, you know, this is, I think for me, I've found, I've done a couple of films over the past 2 years because of the pandemic, sort of using these new techniques, and I'm really enjoying it, using a lot of samples, but doing it in a way that doesn't sound like it, and bringing an energy that I think hopefully is unique to me. So yeah, I'm hoping that that there'll be some interesting atmospheric genre style projects in the future, whether it's narratives or docs, or even, you know, I'd love to, I haven't done any series yet, but I would love to see if there's a cool series out there for me.
And I would say it's about time.
Well, I've been busy, which is good. So
you've been busy, and you've been doing wonderful, wonderful work. So if you want to learn more about Max, please check out our bio down below in the comment section. Max, thanks so much for coming by the Film Music House this year, and thanks for joining us. And for more video content, please join us on YouTube. Thanks, Max.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone. Take care.